Order. I call the whistle wall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's my pleasure to take a call in this debate on the state of the nation. And already we have seen, I guess, the territory be defined by some of the realities of our country. We have growing inequalities in New Zealand. We have children living in poverty. And as a consequence of that reality, we have seen the Prime Minister announce a policy really that is trying to say we care about children. The reality is, however, that under this national government, more families, more children are in poverty because the priority of the government has been about giving tax cuts to the rich. It has been about ensuring that their mates are better off. And so the big challenge for New Zealanders, I think, is to see past the policies that have been announced and really look at an alternative, which is what we in the Labour Party want to present. And we make no apologies for prioritising children. We make no apologising for ensuring that those most in need receive the services that they need to run their families in a way which means our children ultimately will have the best start in life. I want to highlight particularly our Best Start policy and our focus on mothers and children. And one of the policies I particularly want to talk to is our antenatal initiative, which will see us provide free antenatal classes for every expectant mum, and also to ensure that 80% of pregnant mums are booked in for antenatal checks by 10 weeks. Now, why is that relevant? Well, it's incredibly relevant in South Auckland, where we have approximately 13.5% of the births of children in this country. That's over 9,000 babies who are born in this country every year are born in South Auckland. And I want to congratulate Ron Patterson and the county's Manukau District Health Board for their report and inquiry into maternity services, because the reality in South Auckland is that only 16% of mothers, expectant mums, actually have that 10-week antenatal check. And on the face of it, people make, I guess, assumptions and judgments about why mothers don't go and see either a lead maternity carer, so a midwife, or a GP. And what we found out through the inquiry before the Health Select Committee, which was focused on improving health outcomes and preventing child abuse with a focus from preconception until 3 years of age, is that in fact in South Auckland we only have 5.5% of the midwives in New Zealand. What does that mean in reality? We're 200 midwives short. So when I look at initiatives like setting a KPI for the health system to ensure that all 80% of mums have an antenatal check, the relevance of that particular policy is going to see the distribution of midwives, of GPs into areas where we most need them. Now, why should we care as a country about setting policies with that aspiration? Well, what we know in South Auckland is that over 110 babies die every year before 28 days of life. It's called perinatal mortality. And so what we know on this side of the House is that unless you redistribute resources, midwife resources, GP resources, those statistics will continue to be negative. And so we'll set this policy agenda based on that evidence, because for us, evidence is what drives the policy that we will take to the electorate. So in terms of addressing the whole inequality that is currently faced by some members of our community, the way that we've seen to do that is obviously to have initiatives such as this, 80% of pregnant mums booked in for antenatal checks by 10 weeks, but also an emphasis on early childhood education. I want to focus on a quote from Professor Mike O'Brien, who is the spokesperson for CPAG, and he talks about the Better Public Services Outcomes Framework and this obsession by the national government for home-based care or playgroup services, which is somehow supposed to mean that every child gets a good start in life in terms of their education pathway. Now, what we know in South Auckland Comet have done some research. We only have 34% provision for under 5-year-olds in South Auckland. We don't have quality early childhood education opportunities for all our children. And what does that mean? It means that a lot of our children are going to school and they're already in deficit. 5- and 6-year-olds who have had no ECE, who in terms of the national standard are already 18 to 2 years behind. If this government was really serious about improving educational outcomes, they would be providing quality early childhood education opportunities for all New Zealand children. And the reality is that they don't have the solutions, they don't understand the circumstances of a lot of our communities, and so they haven't got the solutions to help us address the growing inequality issue here in our country. Before Christmas, I made an appointment to see Professor Graham Aitken and Professor Elizabeth McKinley, and I specifically wanted to go and see them because they run an initiative called StarPath. Now, StarPath is an incredibly ambitious but also concentrated and targeted initiative because what it does is it fundamentally accepts that the biggest obstacle to student achievement is social inequality. So what do? They work with decile 1, 2 schools to create opportunities for students at those schools to get into university. What's the relevance? Well, actually, if you want to move the agenda from identifying what the problems are, you actually have to create solutions, and you also have to look at equality of outcome, which is also something that this side of the House is preoccupied with, because it's not good enough just to identify we have problems. You have to have solutions. So what StarPath does is work with principals, works with students, families and communities to provide clear pathways into university. And the relevance of that discussion to the government's prioritisation of the teaching profession and creating more bureaucracy is that the reality is if you come from a decile 1 or 2 community, one of you will go to university compared to 3 students from a decile 9 and 10 community. So if we want to fundamentally address social inequalities, then we actually have to look at equality of outcome. And StarPath has been created specifically to address the underachievement. I believe it's the lack of clear pathways to university for children from decile 1 and 2 schools. So we are committing to continuing to work with initiatives like StarPath. And actually, I think that StarPath, as a specific initiative currently concentrated at University of Auckland, is something that we should be looking at rolling out to other universities and to other communities. I also would like to talk about the teaching profession and also the principals and teachers in communities like South Auckland and Manurewa specifically, who I know are excellent teachers. They're passionate and committed to their students. But the reality for those teachers in some communities is that addressing the social determinants of educational achievement is actually about making sure our children are fed. And so there is a direct and clear correlation between our children fulfilling their potential, but within a context of all schools in my electorate, without question, providing some form of nutrition for children, whether it be breakfast clubs that are provided by external agencies, a lot of church groups and other community groups in the community, or the schools taking responsibility themselves. The reality is that that is the biggest issue for a lot of our families. And so that side of the House may make light of the fact that we want to commit to every parent of children born in the first year getting the $60 a week payment. And for some families it will extend to years 2 and 3, because we know that parents need support, and that $60 a week will go a long way to ensuring that our children have a better start in life. And so I'm incredibly proud to belong to a party who have prioritised children, and we will go into this election being very clear that our biggest challenge into the future is addressing the inequality and the growing inequality that we've seen, particularly under this national government. And so yes, I agree with the previous speaker. Bring on the election and let's fight it out in the communities. Kia ora.
I call the Honourable Nikki Kay.
Mr Speaker, look, I am very pleased